nearly sufficient account of. There's a very good reason why they make these statements. They will do whatever is necessary. Now, let's move on then to the sort of second part of what is it they're going to do, what is it they are doing, and what do I think they should do, which may not necessarily be the same thing. I said 9th of May last year, heads of government decided they weren't going to allow this to disintegrate. They came forward with the $1 trillion package. Sounds better saying trillion rather than 750 billion. But it was a big shock and awe package. It turned out not to be quite that big, but that's technical questions. But the other thing they did was say there is going to be some big changes in economic governance. Profound stuff. And of course this was not reported at all around the UK, and I don't even think many people realise the significance. The problem has been that countries like Greece and Portugal have suffered a major loss of competitiveness. That's why they were running current account deficits of 10% of GDP and more. And something had to be done about it. That wasn't yet reflected in the budget deficits. It was becoming so as they were losing tax revenue because of lack of activity. But the real problem, the root, which we hadn't looked at, was a loss of competitiveness. Something must be done about that, and that's what the government said will be done. They said this again, there was a consultation from the Commission in the spring, early summer. They said it again at the June summit, and in September the Commission came forward with a package of 6 measures, which are dense reading, I admit. So if you want to sleep soundly, that's one way to do it. But they are very profound things. And they split, and this is the huge recognition. This is why my title of the book about the Eurozone becoming a political union, this is where it comes from. That there will be separate measures for the Eurozone rather than just the EU. So we're separating out that group. It's a two-speed Europe driven by the currency. And some of the things that they're talking about, just to quote, give you an idea, this is a proposal for regulation on enforcement measures to correct excessive macroeconomic imbalances in the euro area. Macroeconomic imbalances, current account deficits, not fiscal stuff, the Stability and Growth Pact, but macroeconomic. Yes, depending on the nature of the imbalance, the policy's prescriptions could potentially address fiscal, wage, macro-structural and macro-prudential policy aspects under the control of government authorities. So the Commission would come forward with proposals, and this is the biggest single change. I don't think it's enough, but it's a serious change. The Commission's proposal will be carried and will be enforced on the relevant country unless it is overturned by a QMV of the Eurozone member states. And to overturn something by a QMV, qualified majority vote, is quite an uphill struggle. Therefore, there must be, providing the Commission is saying something sensible, which it nearly always does, I have to say, if they propose something, it's going to go into action. Unless the country which is suffering a macroeconomic imbalance, which we would describe as a crisis, they can persuade the rest of the countries that they shouldn't be penalised for it and they shouldn't do anything about it. And something will happen. Now, there are also sanctions. 0.1% of GDP and non-interest bearing deposits and then interest bearing and all the rest of it. I laughed when I read these, I have to say. For 10 years now, one's looked at what ECOFIN has done. The provisions are there in the Treaty of Maastricht to the outside, at the outset. And ECOFIN has regularly made mouthed comments about what countries should do. They've done nothing about it. So the idea that this body, this worthy body, who has systematically and continuously failed for a decade to bite anyone, and has presided over the crash that we've had and the problems we had, the idea that they're going to resolve it all by imposing sanctions of 0.1% of GDP, forget it. The thing which will happen is that the markets will do something about it. And they are doing something about it, and this isn't surprising, because when I joined the city in 1972, just a few years ago, the debt-GDP ratios of the main states were about 32% of GDP. This year they will be virtually 90%, on average, this is including the good states. So that tripling in my career, if public spending worked, of course everything would be marvellous now. The streets would be paved in gold and it would be all tripling. But it hasn't happened. All that's happened is the interest bill has gone up. The interest bill is quite modest at the moment because of the ECB's interest rate policy. But when that changes, and you begin to roll in the new level of interest rates, 90% of GDP, this is going to be bad news. And we think about Portugal, for example, now with a 7% interest rate or thereabouts on their bonds. If they have had a big rise, something like 3 percentage point increase on a budget, on an accumulated debt which is 80-odd% of GDP, they've just had a 2% of GDP annual penalty extracted from them by the markets. So finance ministers talk about 0.1%, forget it. The markets have done it. Because the real question has now come, can they afford to pay these loans back? And the question has been answered, and in the case of Greece and Ireland, they answered no, they can't. And is it going to affect Portugal? Will it be Spain? Will it be Italy? Will it be Belgium? No government in Belgium now. Country with a very large debt. There are some big questions here. If you look at those big 6 countries, the 6 debtors who have high interest rate spreads, ones which are clearly the markets are signaling are a source of concern. If you look at those 6, in the next 3 years they will have bonds to renew of about €1 trillion. Not a billion, $1 trillion, 1,000 billion. And that's why I say when you look at the EFSF and its successor at 250 million available funding, it's just not enough. So we have to finish up with something, the government's doing something which will enable them to tell the markets with some degree of confidence that if things go wrong for the countries who are judged to be in difficulties, we will quadruple resources available. And as a result, you can be sure that your bonds will get paid. Now, $1 trillion is a lot of money. We get used to these zeros, but it is in fact a lot of money. But why would the heads of government decide to stump this up? And the answer is very simple. I sat down and looked at the bank exposures. Remember, single market, single banking market, free flow of capital, banks to be more concentrated, down from 8,000 banks to fewer, efficiency gains, cross-border lending. The banks have gone out and done it. They've done what their political masters asked them. And so they've now got large cross-border exposures. And the 4 AAA countries, France, Germany, Netherlands and Austria, I looked up in the BIS statistics their banks' exposure across borders to the 6 that I mentioned. And the total is €1.9 trillion. Just those 4 AAA countries, 1.9 trillion. And that represents 23% of the lending of those banks, or the banks in those countries. So if there is a significant default, let's say 50% haircut, that's a 10% hit, that is the capital of the banking system of France, Germany, Italy and the Netherlands deleted, wiped out.